This year, ANC Cyril Ramaphosa, President, highlighted the program of action that had emanated from the 55th National Conference, a program to shape a better future for South Africa and committing to an inclusive economy. PBF is a vehicle for the ruling party to claim direct success to transform the economy. I account directly to the TG and have to report progress on a weekly basis, so we really mean business. The only exposure I have of poverty, unfortunately, in India is the Slumdog movie and the book. So beyond that, I don't know. So I'm hoping, Commissioner, that one of these days I'll be invited to India as well as to Kacholi. Coming to BRICS, of course, this is a game changer. Our members need training. They need to understand the challenges in international markets as well as the risks. They need access to funding. Otherwise, these bridges that we are building will remain a pie in the sky for Africa. I'm calling upon AFCFTA to collaborate with PBF and, of course, my country, all the business, to build a capacity for SMMEs to grow very quickly and start trading. We are working with many African countries in my office and has conceptualized large-scale projects to enable Africa to export processed products. In our recent visit to Uganda, where we met the president of Uganda, President Museveni, he was very clear that Africa will have to look at processing, especially agro-processing. Hence, we have started a large-scale project. We need assistance with training to upscale our efforts and make quick impact. Share experience of what we are doing with other countries or in other countries. We are encouraged by the latest SA statistics, which show that South African economy grew for a second consecutive year, expanding by 2% between 2021 and 2022 from 4.5 trillion to 4.6 trillion. And I have no doubt that India had a lot to do with it as well. GDP reached an all-time high in 2022. The economy grew by 0.3% from 2019 pre-pandemic era, reaching 4.5 trillion. Transport, storage, and communication, construction, and personal services were the bright spots in the fourth quarter. Transport, storage, communication made the largest positive impact, rising by 0.7% and contributing 0.1% of the percentage point to growth. This was mainly due to increased economic activity in passenger land transport, air transport, and communication services. My remarks today, as we contemplate harnessing synergies of India-Africa cooperation with the BRICS and AFCFTA context, comes with the hard work we have done and continue to do during BRICS. PBF has had a series of large-scale business engagements in preparation for the BRICS political party dialogue. And of course, we had at least 500 business delegates in our welcoming dinner, a presidential gala dinner on the 21st. We have also jointly worked with Numelax, our partner, in a number of efforts to do research and understand the underlying factors behind some of the challenges. With the pharmaceuticals this week, they published the results of many months of research and engagements, which the Minister of Health will take to the BRICS Summit. The one area that stands out for me is that Africa and India can collaborate in ensuring that our traditional medicines are researched, packaged, and hit the international shelves on an equal footing as the Western medicines. I've never had COVID myself, Your Excellencies. I believe that it's because I took a concoction of many African immune boosters, whether it's Lengana, Ginger, Moringa, and Simos from Tanzania, you name it, it worked for me. And my entire family, none of them ever had COVID. I sincerely thank our President and TG for staying close to PBF, supporting us not only to have our businesses on the table, but at the table. The feedback is encouraging because it shows that they appreciate every step of the way, that they get a little push. We can and should, through Africa-India collaboration, focus our attention on practical engagements around the BRICS market. We are going to build on what have already built the foundation of. The PBF has worked internationally with organizations such as Confederation of Indian Industry, the Brazilian Micro and Small Business Support Services, the China Council for the Promotion of International Trade, the Korean Trade Promotion Agency, and the China Economic Cooperation Center, amongst others. On the issue of trade facilitation, down the years, the PBF has led delegations to India, the DRC, Kenya, Tanzania, UAE, UK, USA, Cuba, Sri Lanka, Germany, Russia, China, Brazil, and Korea, South Korea, among others. Traditionally, our interactions in the host country included a networking session and/or business interaction with the business from that country. The advent of COVID necessitated that those trade delegations visit be done virtually, and consequently, the PF reached out to various foreign missions based in South Africa. This has taught us, ladies and gentlemen, that we should not wait until we can fly to another country. In between, we can have many interactions using technology. We look forward to commencing our trade visits again and establishing the face-to-face contacts so vital in the course of the economy of Africa and its people. In the course of preparing remarks for today, I came across a quote by the author, C.J. Sheriff. It stuck with me. Trade isn't about goods. Trade is about information. Goods sit in the warehouse until information moves on. That perception, I guess, is what I'm trying to convey today. That in the experience of the PBF, the exchange of information between ourselves, between our governments, and between our respective businesses through a dedicated and focused programs of engagement is amongst the most helpful when you contemplate the theme of today's engagement. Harnessing synergies, India-Africa cooperation for prosperity in the BRICS African Continental Free Trade Area landscape. We commend the work of the Commission of India and of the IBF and the remarkable work to promote and facilitate trade and business opportunity, as together we redouble our efforts to combine our respective skills, experience, and efforts, and in so doing, provide the added impetus to function economically at full power. It has been a privilege to be with you today, and I'm even more confident that events such as this one will inspire us to continue to engage. Information by ongoing engagement will move the goods out of the warehouse, and transformation of our economies and those of all of Africa into the heights of its fullest potential. The PBF is inspired, and so is my political party, and stands ready to do just that. I thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Humaira Mokesti-Chunara, the CEO of the Progressive Business Forum. Now we're going to get another perspective on the same topic, that is harnessing synergies, India-Africa cooperation for prosperity in BRICS and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement landscape. And I'm going to call on Sri Damu Ravi, who joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1989 and served in Indian missions abroad in Mexico, Cuba, Brussels, in various capacities from 1991 to 2001. He served at the headquarters in the Ministry of External Affairs as Deputy Secretary in West Europe and UN divisions from 2001 to 2006, and he served as Private Secretary to Minister of Tourism and Culture from March 2006 to May 2009, and was Joint Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, responsible for India's relations with Latin America and Caribbean countries from October 2009 to December 2013. He served in the Ministry of Commerce as Joint Secretary from 2014 January to February 2020, where he handles India's trade policy, including WTO issues, the fisheries negotiations, trade policy review, was part of the Indian delegation to WTO Ministerial Conference in Nairobi in November 2015 and in Buenos Aires in December 2017. He also handled India's trade and investment relations with regional groups such as G20, BRICS Commonwealth, APEC, UNCTAD, etc. And he was India's chief negotiator in the mega regional free trade agreement, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And on return to Ministry of External Affairs in 2020, he was appointed as Additional Secretary for COVID and Europe. He is currently Secretary of Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs, holds a master's degree in political science from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and he has published research papers on trade matters. So he's the right person to talk to us about the synergies. Well, so you know, he is married and has a daughter.
Thank you, Tim Odese, for the generous introduction. But like Prabhat, I also felt a little bit of misgiving that I may not be able to live up to the introduction that you've given. But thank you. I think it sometimes helps us to recall the career progress that we made in our lives. Well, I take this opportunity also to thank the High Commissioner of India, my dear friend Prabhat Kumar and his team, the Deputy High Commissioner Bhanu Prakash, the Consul General of India, Mahesh Kumar and his team, Mr. Praveer Tripathi, Ms. Humaira, the very nice perspective you brought in there, and of course the Secretary General who is of AFC TFEA, who is going to be here today shortly. The topic, I must say, is extremely thought-provoking, and it's very much relevant at a time when we are going to have the 15th summit, the Leaders' Summit of the BRICS, shortly from now, few days from now. And I must say it is both warming up to the occasion, talking about trade, talking about business activities, interactions on investment and many areas. In the next few days, all of us will be exposed to new ideas, new perspectives on how this relationship between BRICS and African countries as a continent will grow in the days to come. So I'm no trade expert, but it's just that professionally I had an opportunity to work in that area previously in the Department of Commerce. I have some ideas to share and be open to any discussions or ideas that come up later on. So I would like to begin to say from a very broad perspective, the 21st century and the difference in the way nations have viewed relationship to the previous century. So 20th century, basically we were all busy in the struggle of freedom, independence in that movement. Nations have collaborated with each other, particularly India, Africa were so close. Solidarity was one aspect. And then institution building later to consolidate the freedom that we gained. But there is still an unfinished agenda there. The unfinished agenda is actually the economic prosperity. And so the leader's vision, the struggle that our forefathers made for our freedom, we still need to recognize and constantly think that there is a collective responsibility for all of us to deliver on that count, which is the economic prosperity and the well-being of all the people. So as we witness growth in our economies, we should also look at whether that growth is evenly distributing, whether it is able to bring prosperity to all the people. That's a different topic for another day. So, in the 21st century, there are significant trends we need to also recognize, and Africa in its entirety. And the 21st century is also defining in the way the countries have created they shape the destiny of the nations. As nations expand, there's aspirational to be part of that institution, which is BRICS. That's why 22 member countries have lined up to be BRICS members. So that's very natural and progressive in the thinking. And the leaders of the BRICS countries have also now realized that that's necessary as we go forward. One factor that we all, in the BRICS countries and also generally in the developing world and the developed world recognize is that as the nations rise economically, the multilateral institutions will become stronger, the multilateral forces will become stronger. So we are looked at the time of the superpower rivalry to some countries dominating unipolar world, and now we are looking at multipolar world. But the fact is that any nation that wishes to rise in the 21st century will need to have Africa on its side. So that's an important factor that we have to take into consideration in our own policies. Each government will have to look at it. And that's not new. India-Africa Summit is what we've done in the last a decade and a half, but we continue to do greater engagement with the African continent. But it's just not India doing. But you have China, you have Japan, you have United States, you have Europe, and within Europe, again, countries like France, Germany, they're also doing that engagement very strongly. So Africa becomes important in the calculation of the nations in their rise. So partnering Africa, in my view, is critical, but how do we ensure that that partnership is going to create win-win solutions? That's again comes back to the policymakers and also businesses that are there today here. Of course, High Commissioner, given the numbers in terms of trade, we have trade between India and Africa is $98 billion and touching 200 billion. Investment, 76 billion, and is poised to grow further. Trade is more or less balanced. That's true. The numbers are important as a benchmarks, but that's not the entire story. The story is elsewhere, and that's much bigger than the numbers. I'll come to that later. We've also talked about traditionally India-Africa engagement, both in terms of trade and investment, but also I think one significant factor is the capacity building. India's traditional program, which is very well known, which is the flagship carrier of the Ministry of External Affairs, is the Indian Technical Economic Cooperation Program, under which we've trained about 500,000 experts from all around the world, and a significant part of it actually with African countries. Indian companies generally been to this part of the world looking at minerals. Mining is an important activity. Of course, there is a lot of infrastructure growth. A lot of companies have also built various infrastructure programs. They have also exported products from India to here. Both the High Commissioner was also mentioning about vaccines. Pharmaceuticals is another area. But I think we need to look at it in a manner that we are able to create win-win solutions. So lines of credit, which is a sovereign-based line of credit that India extends and many countries around the world extends to do projects here, we should be looking at, can we do greater number of projects with a little bit innovative financing, blended financing concepts. So within our Ministry of External Affairs and the Government of India, we are trying to work out whether concessional financing arrangement could be possible for companies to tap the financing resources in the country and elsewhere. There are lots of pension funds. The real problem in tapping that is actually risk mitigation element. So we have to cover that. If you can cover the risk mitigation element, then it's easy to tap financing, institutional funding arrangements, both in India and abroad. And many times we come to hear about pension funds in trillions of dollars and waiting to be invested in across the world. But they also want to be sure that their investments are able to get good returns and their investments are safe and they have a long-term duration in terms of the earnings. So, building on that idea, I believe that if we are today able to do $1 billion a year projects around the world, we should be able to do actually more than $5 to $6 billion worth of projects in many parts of the world, but significant in Africa. And that's eminently doable. It's not impossible. And we will be working very closely on these ideas. The next idea was the trade financing arrangements. Again, banks in our part of the world and this part of the world are not still able to have the confidence to trust each other. We have to bring an institution, which is the trade financing arrangements, where the banks are able to recognize each other and there is that element of risk mitigation being handled. Then the trade will trigger to many levels. High Commissioner mentioned about the institution setting. The Indian Institute of Technology very successfully introduced recently in Tanzania, and we are looking at similar arrangements, India's institutions going out of India and becoming global. Another related to this concept is actually skill development. The Indian technology institutions, these have done enormously good in the country, developing skills at local level to make people employable, even though they may not be graduates. That's the model we should be pursuing. So from iTech, skill development in India, we should bring skill development to local area. That is really sustainable. And that's also able to generate employment at the local level. And this is an important idea because we have to understand that like India, Africa is even much more younger than us. And it's going to be a young population, demographics to its advantage for a long time to come. So this is again a plan of action we wish to aggressively pursue with India-Africa relationship. Trade in its very traditional concept and understanding has always been seen sending goods across countries, cross-border. So export from India to South Africa, the trade between our two countries is about $18 billion. Unfortunately, it's evenly balanced. But then when we look at trade, we are only looking at goods moving from one country to another country across the borders. But that's still very traditional. That still will go on for a long time to come. But we have to understand that trade has a very different way of doing it. That is manufacturing locally. I wouldn't say that you have to reinvent the wheel of doing everything in one country. But you can take advantage of certain conditions in Africa to be able to manufacture in Africa. I would say this will also boost trade because you're actually feeding into the country intermediates, technology and services to make a finished product. And that finished product will sell very well because Africans will own it as their own. Because Africans also will be contributing to the making of the product. That's a very significant thought. So we have to work in that kind of win-win situations and solutions. And I would say this fits in very broadly with the Africa's vision of continental-wide industrialization, which is the Agenda 2063. It fits in very well with also the AFC-FTA concept. Now we have to be anticipating developments that will happen on this continent. What it means for a country like India to engage with Africa when its common market comes into force at some time in the near future. When the internal tariffs will collapse, the regulatory systems are harmonized across the continent. It may not happen overnight, but over a period of time it will happen. And this will happen with engagement. So when we look at trade in terms of purely goods moving cross-border, it's still very traditional. And the dynamic way of looking at engaging with countries is last mile connectivity, last mile manufacturing in this country. So when Prime Minister went to Egypt, when our Foreign Minister Jaishankar went to Tanzania, we had very interesting offers of special economic zones that are dedicated for Indian companies in this part of the world. So we want to develop India's special economic zones that companies will set up manufacturing bases, do collaborations with Africans to produce products for Africa, region-wise. So Africa is a very big country. It's several times bigger. So we can have sub-regionally, East Africa to South Africa to West Africa. So that's the ideas we are working on back in India. And we would like the industry to understand that this is the way forward. What does BRICS and Africa do? I think we have to put this also in the context of the debate topic of today's India, the Africa BRICS, and then how these countries can together work in Africa. So when we discuss about this concept, there's several ideas come in. Each country has some strength. Let's look at Brazil. It has done pioneering work in biofuels. It's an agriculture powerhouse. Some of those ideas we can easily bring in here in collaborations, because energy and development are so interlinked concept. We have to find solutions for energy. Biofuels, bioethanol, renewable energy, where India again done extraordinary work. We have gigawatt scale solar energy plants in India. Of course, the Prime Minister has a highly ambitious project of 500 gigawatts of renewables, of which solar alone coming to around 200 gigawatts. And ethanol blending in our fuel is 10% we've crossed already. It was to be done by 2025. Now we have crossed that target. Now we're going in for 20% of ethanol blending in our fuel. Those are the ideas we can bring in Africa in collaborations wise. Food security. We say that Africa is still today importing a lot of food items from outside world. But I must say it's very unfortunate. It's a land so rich, so fertile, so many rivers, but yet it's importing food items from outside. There's something missing in the whole thinking here. It's not that Africa has failed, it's actually we failed. Countries like India, BRICS, have failed in understanding what is the potential in this part of the world. So again, we've been able to find solution feeding our people, but it's not that India can grow everything in India. And if you do it, you will not be able to last long, because then you are depleting your groundwater resources. So there has to be a different understanding of how you tackle the food security in the world. And Africa is so important in that metrics. So can we encourage food producing companies to come to Africa, grow food products here? That's one way of looking at it. Do value addition here before you export it out. Another important thing and message of Prime Minister himself is shift your focus to away from commercial food products to traditional food growing products. Millets is an important concept there. We all are used to eating rice and wheat because, we've been taught that way. But there's another way, which we've lost, which is the millets, which traditionally grown in many parts of our world, but we lost that to the race of consumerism and products that have become so common in the daily life. We can start to think about it. The companies and businesses can start to think about it to popularize and get the nutrition value. People have to understand that that has greater value than the commercial crops. Post-COVID, health has become so important. The healthcare has become a priority for all the countries around the world. And COVID has taught us one lesson all, which is it has not spared any country. It has not spared even the remotest islands. It has touched everybody. Perhaps, it happens once in a century time. But if you look at the history, human history, in the last 100 years, pandemics were so too many. We don't know the reasons, but if it has happened before, it will go into revisit. There's no escaping from that. So healthcare should become a priority naturally. Like Madam Humera has mentioned, that traditional medicine has a lot of value in tackling preventive care. At the same time, pharma companies of India have done very well. We have become India is now the pharmacy of the world. But again, we used to sending medicines across border to this part of the world. Can we look at another arrangement of fill and finish production in Africa? Because we also need to fight the regulatory barriers. And the best way to do it is be in the continent and do that fill and finish, both in the generics and the vaccine space. There is a huge potential there. So I can talk many ideas like this, but in terms of projects, also, I believe when I travel around Africa, I see there's so much scope for construction of roads, railways, housing. There again, we shouldn't be doing alone. We should be looking within the BRICS countries where the collaborative projects are possible and look at a strategy of mapping out projects within the BRICS matrix. The last item that I had in mind was actually something which is so crucial for all of us, which is the technology, and how technology is going to shape our lives. And more in the days to come, the technology is going to impact and influence in a manner that we will never be able to change. We'll never be able to go back. And this is what has happened. In the last 50 years of technology development of space, globalization has enhanced. People have misgivings today. Perhaps there is re-globalization or there is a pause on the globalization. But this may be a temporary phase. But the way today the AIs are going to influence, the artificial intelligence, the robotic engineering, the 3D printing, and the internet-based technologies, the Industrial Revolution 4.0, it's going to affect all of us. So nations have to be prepared for this change. And we have to be alert, not just us, but we have to prepare our next generation to face this digital revolution that's going to shape our lives. In that context, there's something that India can offer. But I won't say that everything that India does is good for everybody else, but no, we'll have to customize it. We'll have to do it in a partnership manner that the countries are able to find their own solutions, taking the idea. Digital public goods is something where we need to focus on. The digital divide that exists both within countries and across nations also is a major problem. We have to bring that ideas into the domain of not only discourse, but also classroom. Some of the solutions, again, High Commissioner has mentioned about, the fintech solutions, the Aadhaar-based technologies that India has successfully introduced in the country to be able to impact lives, the common man, to be able to eliminate corruption or minimize corruption to a large extent, and be able to provide the delivery of services of the government to the people to a large extent. These have been successfully introduced in our country, but I believe through collaborations with African countries, there's a huge scope and potential there. The last item I had in mind was actually how the NDB, within the BRICS context, the new development bank, is operating. People say that it still has a small capital, but what's important is it may have a small capital, but within the short time of its existence, it has done over 100 projects, including in Africa and South Africa. And the beauty of it is there are no conditionalities. And like you see mostly in the multilateral banks of IMF and the World Bank, the NDB banks have achieved. But we can accelerate that pace. But we shouldn't stop there. The BRICS countries should also think in terms of developing capital markets in this part of the world to be able to raise African nations their own bonds for infrastructure, for development and growth, and train countries to be able to do trading in their own currencies. Because hard currency, either dollar or euro, availability puts limitations on how much you can trade with other countries. We have to find a solution for that limitation. And to begin with is actually doing trading in your own national currencies. It's a hard sell, but I must say, if we start talk about it, if we start to educate ourselves, it's imminently possible. I thank you for this opportunity, for giving me this chance. I'm sure in the next few days, we will have a lot more opportunities to exchange views. And I wish the CII India Business Forum all the very success. Thank you.
Well, that's the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, as we heard from Mr. Damu Ravi and we heard from Ms. Humaria Mwakesi Chunara earlier on. They've given us a lot of food for thought. So, we're going to break for lunch in the next 15, 20 minutes or so. And then during lunch, think about it, mull over it, because we're going to have a sort of panel discussion on it, and you can raise your questions in that regard. But the India Business Forum is not just concerned about business and trade and economic connections. It is also supporting philanthropic projects, the development of human beings, and the IBF supports, for instance, Uplift a Child. And I'm going to call on the CEO and founder of Uplift a Child, Mr. Sem Vunumu, to please come forward and tell us a bit more about it. I'm not sure if we're having a presentation here or, okay, that is coming through. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank God for the blessings of life. I would like to thank the government of South Africa for making all of us a part of its family. And I know our citizens fit well and they're part of the growth of South Africa. And I would like to thank His Excellency Prabhat Kumar and His Excellency Mahesh Kumar, and wanted to thank the IBF President, Mr. Praveer Ji, for giving me this opportunity. All of you could see me with this suit, tie, and well-dressed. But once upon a time, I was a slum dweller from slums of Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh, India. Born in the slums to a single parent, I lost my dad when I was only 6 months old. And my mom, living in the slums, it was so difficult for her to take care of me and my sister. But she had a goal in life. She wanted to somehow put me in a good English medium school so that I can get the best education, and education can change everything. That was her goal, even though she was uneducated. She went to a school asking for help. There was a rich school. They declined. They said, sorry, ma'am, this is a rich school. It costs at least 2 lakhs just for admission. Sorry, go away. My mom did not give up. Then she went to a second school, told about her wish, and they felt pity on her, and they gave her like 100 rupees and said, sorry, take this money. You cannot get your child in this school. She did not give up. She went to the third school, and the school principal felt touched. And he said, why don't you work in my home as a servant maid, and I will try to get you a sponsor. And that person kept his word. After 6 months of work, the principal was able to connect me with a sponsor so that I could step into the school building and start my education. My sponsor helped me till 10th grade or high school. And after high school, I was on my own. I was doing part-time jobs here and there, completed 2 bachelors, 1 master's, and one of my bachelors I completed from Jamaica, West Indies. I became a self-supporting student, and all of this was possible because of God's blessings, my mother's blessings, and the sponsor's help. And all of this together made me what I am. And in India itself, I became a millionaire and moved out of slums, making some money, and gave my mom a very good life. And in 1996, I moved to United States as a permanent resident, and there I was working in the IT industry. While working in the IT industry, I felt I have to give back to my country, India, where I came from. So it took 4 years for me to settle down properly. And once I was settled down a little bit, I put away 25% of my income. So myself and my wife together, we started supporting 4 children in the first year. But in a span of 4 years, we supported 45 children with our own money, helping children from the same slum where I came from. And at that time, I was working at Discovery TV channel at the world headquarters. Some of my co-workers visited me at my office, and at that time they have noticed some of the children's pictures. So they used to ask me, Sam, who are these children? I told them, I do not know them, but I am educating them, sponsoring them, giving them a chance to go to school. And some of those people were settled in the United States for many, many years. They felt they were touched, and they said, Sam, we didn't do much before. Can we also join you and start helping? I said, yes. So that is how one by one started joining, and what I started as a small little thing has converted into a little organization where we have now 4,000 children from all over India, Nepal, Philippines, Congo, Kenya, and South Africa are in school today because of this. And I'm running this with $500,000 annual budget. So with the charity I'm running, and of course now I have some ideas where I wanted to convert into money and value and donate most of it to underprivileged families around. So this is how I got started. A slum dweller is now a US citizen doing very well from Washington DC, making a difference there. And we have a Facebook page, so we put a lot of information there. So somebody from South Africa sent me a message. Sam, you're doing very, very good. I've been following since a few years. Can I do something? Can I join you and do something? And that person happened to be one among you, that is Mr. Nagaraj Gurala. Can you please come up? So he found me. I did not find him. He found me because he saw that I have been leading by example, doing whatever little I could, and his initiatives has come very well. Since 2019, he and his team have been helping a lot of projects within South Africa, And now we have very big plans. We are thinking very, very big. We really wanted to do good. So I wanted to leave a thought with you. Please pardon me. Don't take it as an advice or anything, but a small idea I have. The idea I have is, most of you are blessed here. That's why you're here. You're blessed with wealth, blessed with a good family. If you really feel you're blessed, what I want to request you is, if you have some employees in your company, if you have like 10 employees, sponsor a child in name of every employee you have. That way, the employee will be very happy and proud to be part of your organization. And also, it will be God's blessings because you're sharing what you have with others. And this idea I have actually communicated with Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. I've been working with some of those people. I don't know how far it will come. I wrote a proposal for $6.45 billion, and that could support 1 million children, and that's my target. And I will succeed because I continue to keep on trying. If it did not happen, that means I'm not there in this world. So as long as I live and keep on trying till I succeed, I wanted to make sure 1 million children like me will be in school. And each child with the gift of education will change people's lives. So this is a thought I wanted to present to you today. I hope you don't mind. And to conclude, I wanted to share with you my favorite quotation. Our savings in this world is not what we have today, but what we give to others. You may have bank balances, you may have money, you may have properties. All of them will stay back in this world, but you will not. If there is something you wanted to do it now, because tomorrow will not come back again. May God bless all of you with good health and happiness. God bless South Africa, God bless our country, India, and God bless the United States of America, where I come from. Thank you, and
Hello. Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Nagaraj Gurala. I'm from India. Thanks for the opportunity, High Commissioner, and also Consular General of India, and also IBF team. Praveer ji, thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's come to the current situation that we are in now. It's 1:45. Is it? We're going to break for lunch. And we've got only 30 minutes. And it's been suggested that we start promptly 1:15. That we're back in here. If you have to bring your food in each of this, please feel free to do that. We'd like to promptly start at 1:15, but we can make up for time. We are going to start with the keynote address by the Secretary of Trade area. Is going to give us the whole story of what the AFCFTA is all about. And then we'll have that session that I promised you. Hopefully we'll get it going by 2:30, by 1:30. And then we'll have somebody at the master, Mr. Wilson, the acting head of President South Africa. And we'll hopefully at 10:00. So now let's break for lunch. Thank you very much. And thanks to all.
Yeah, let's just
Have their seats, please. We are just about to start our second session. His Excellency is already arrived, and we are just about to start our second session.
Good. Please have your seats, ladies and gentlemen. Tim.
Thanks very much, Praveen. Welcome back once again, and we are trying to make up for lost time, but be that as it may, we're going to run a very tight ship. And this time around, we've had a lot of talk. We've heard about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, but then do we know exactly what it is, what its implications are, who's involved, and what does it entail? Well, me neither. I know a little bit about it, but not as detailed as the person who's in charge, and he's going to talk to us, and that's His Excellency Wamkele Mene, who's the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. He was elected by the 33rd Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the African Union to this position. And prior to being elected Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, he served as Chief Director, Africa Economic Relations at the Department of Trade and Industry of South Africa. And in this role, he was South Africa's Chief Trade Negotiator in the AFCFTA and the tripartite FTA negotiations. During his tenure as Chief Negotiator, South Africa ratified both the AFCFTA and tripartite FTA agreements. And prior to assuming his position, Mr. Mene occupied the position of Director, International Trade Law and Investment Law at the Department of Trade and Industry, a role in which he was Principal Legal Counsel on international trade law and international investment law. From 2010 until 2015, he represented South Africa at the World Trade Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. He was elected to the position of Chairman of the WTO's Committee on International Trade in Financial Services. And prior to joining the Department of Trade and Industry of South Africa, he worked for Wall Street-based law firms in the London and Hong Kong offices. He has written and lectured internationally on trade, international law, international investment law, international business law, holds a Bachelor of Arts law degree from Rhodes University, South Africa, Master of Arts, International Studies and Diplomacy, with specialization in international economics from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and Masters of Laws in Banking Law and Financial Regulation from the Law Department of London School of Economics and Political Science. His Excellency Wamkele Mene, please come forward and talk to us and help a person like myself make sense of what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is all about, and whether we can squeeze ourselves in somewhere. Who knows? You never know. Never underestimate the power and the ingenuity of entrepreneurship. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mudis. Thank you very much, Program Director Dade Mudise, for the introduction. I want to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me today. I want to a special thanks to the High Commissioner and his team, High Commissioner Kumar. I also want to thank the President for inviting me to this event today. Mr. Tripathi and I have been discussing this interaction for the last 2 years, and we are both very happy that eventually we're able to convene here today. So thank you very much for the invitation. The Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Your Excellencies, High Commissioners and Ambassadors that are here, the CEOs and business people that are here today from India and other parts of the continent, it is a pleasure to have this opportunity to discuss with you the AFCFTA. I understand that there was a detailed discussion in the morning, and so this session will build on that the discussion that you had in the morning. You may be aware that the AFCFTA has now been ratified by 47 countries out of 55 on the African continent. Only one country has yet to sign the agreement, and we look forward to working with that country to make sure that the agreement is signed. We are working with those countries that have not yet ratified the agreement to do so. But for now, in terms of progress, 47 countries have deposited their instruments of ratification. That means that 47 countries have committed, fully committed to the very ambitious trade and investment liberalization objective that we have undertaken and that we have begun since we started this negotiation a few years ago in 2015 here in Johannesburg, South Africa. When you look at the character of the countries, of the economy of Africa in many countries across Africa, in summary, one can characterize it as over-reliance on the export of primary commodities, as well as smallness of national economies, fragmentation of markets across regions, sometimes fragmentations within a region, and of course a multiplicity of currencies. And this multiplicity of currencies imposes significant costs on doing business and trade in Africa. And so this is the backdrop for the existence of the AFCFTA, and in the wisdom of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, when they took the decision at their summit here in Johannesburg in 2015 to accelerate the integration of Africa's economy, the tool that was most immediately available is a free trade area, which later, through various stages of integration, will progress into a customs union and eventually a single monetary union. At this stage, we are in very early phases of Africa's integration, and that is the 47 countries that have ratified the agreement establishing the AFCFTA. There are significant challenges that have actually presented themselves in the last 2 years that have, in my view, underscored the importance of an integrated market in Africa. And I will speak a little bit about that. The AFCFTA is a market of 1.3 billion people, roughly similarly populated as India, with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion United States dollars. It's a significant market, but faces challenges of fragmentation, as I mentioned earlier. And we hope that this legal instrument, the AFCFTA, will be the tool that we need to consolidate gains from an integrated market. We predict that the pre-COVID, the relative success of African countries pre-COVID, of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, at that time 6 were in Africa. And our projections are that Africa's economies will grow by more than 5.5% on average in 2023-2024 and reclaim their position among the world's 10 fastest growing economies. And furthermore, that the African continent will outperform the rest of the world in economic growth over the next 2 years, with real domestic product averaging approximately 4% in 2023 and 2024, which is higher than the projected global average of 2.7% and 3.2% respectively. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, there were attributes and factor endowments that enabled the African continent to be positioned for competitiveness in a number of specific sectors, which in a few minutes I will refer to. And so whilst we recognize the fact that these numbers and these projections that I've just shared with you do not necessarily mean that the post-pandemic recovery of Africa is complete. There are a number of challenges and constraints that continue to present themselves. It is, however, a positive development, the fact that the projections are indicating that Africa's growth path will continue as before the COVID-19 pandemic. The AfCFTA is projected to consolidate and to create a market of close to 7 trillion United States dollars by the year 2035. That is to say, combined GDP, consumer spending, and business spending. And by the year 2050, the turn of the century, the African continent shall have a combined GDP of 16.2 trillion United States dollars, with the youngest working force in the world at that time. Therefore, the potential of the African continent, if you look at these projections and if you accept these projections, the potential of the African continent certainly is very compelling as a trade and investment partner. The AfCFTA therefore seeks to unlock this potential, particularly in industrialization and export diversification. We have identified a number of priority sectors which we believe will enable rapid industrialization of the African continent. A few days ago, I shared with an audience the fact that in the early 50s, the GDP per capita of South Korea was $61. And through rapid industrialization, in less than one generation, the results are there to see in terms of South Korea's successful and rapid industrialization. There is no reason why the African continent cannot be as successful in rapid industrialization as any part of the world. Of course, what has been a constraint are those characters that I mentioned earlier, of fragmentation of markets, over-reliance on the export of primary commodities. So through the identification of these sectors, such as automotive sector, pharmaceuticals, agriculture and agro-processing, transport and logistics, where we see opportunities not only for investment, but of opportunities for value-added production to enable and to power Africa's industrialization. Let me share with you one example why there are opportunities for investing in Africa in one of these sectors. In the pharmaceutical sector, in 2019, Africa imported $16 billion worth of pharmaceutical products. This is $16 billion worth of jobs, opportunities, innovation forgone in Africa. So we encourage and we are working actively with the global pharmaceutical industry to establish manufacturing capacity here in Africa. And we have already started seeing signs of that success. For example, the very first mRNA vaccine production facility has been established in Rwanda, in Kigali, and the value chain spreads amongst 4 countries, Rwanda, South Africa, Senegal, and Ghana. There are more interventions that are being made at a continental level to enable a truly continental value chain in the area of pharmaceuticals. Once again, I want to invite Indian companies to consider investing in pharmaceutical value chains in special economic zones that have a specialization in the area of pharmaceuticals, so that as we tailor an import substitution strategy to reduce our reliance on the exports of pharmaceuticals and increase productive capacity a partnership can develop and collaboration can develop. Investors can see returns on their investment. Job creation and innovation can happen in Africa. Similarly, in the area of the automotive sector, here again we see opportunities not only in the assembly of vehicles, but also in the components manufacturing sector, components to assemble and manufacture vehicles. The African continent produces less than 1 million units of vehicles per year. Your country, India, produces close to 5 million units of vehicles per year, and we are similarly populated, as I said earlier. The deficit that exists between India and Africa's manufacturing capacity of vehicles is actually an opportunity for investment here in Africa. We know that for every unit of investment that is made on the assembly line to manufacture a vehicle, that 4 units of investments are made in the components sector. So we see opportunities in the automotive sector, not only for the countries that already are competitive and industrialized in vehicle manufacturing, such as Morocco, Egypt, South Africa, but we see opportunities for other countries on the African continent to be part of the value chain for benefit from the automotive sector. So that by the year 2035, Africa can be producing 5 million units of vehicles a year or more, where possible. And this, as I say, is an opportunity for investment in one of these priority sectors. The rules of origin that are currently being negotiated will facilitate seamless movement of goods and services across the African continent. Africa produces and Africa exports and trades in close to 5,000 products. Before the entry into force of this agreement, there was a lack of harmonization of rules of origin. Depending on the region from which you are exporting or the country you are importing in, different rules of origin applied. If you were an investor or a manufacturer in Kenya, exporting to Nigeria, and exporting also the same product to Egypt, you were subject to different rules of origin. I'm happy to report to you that now, as a result of the AfCFTA, we have converged on over 90% rules of origin in Africa. That is to say that an economic operator or a manufacturer or an investor will now enjoy a single set of rules of origin for trade and export in Africa. We have also agreed and established a legal framework for tariffs. There is an AfCFTA tariff book, so that once again an economic operator can seamlessly, with predictability, with certainty, know what tariffs, what duty applies to their product as they export across the African continent. We have introduced the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. As you know, there are 42 currencies in Africa, and the 42 currencies trading in Africa, when we have 42 currencies, requires use of a third currency. And use of a third currency is expensive. Our estimates are that close to $5 billion annually is the cost of currency convertibility to enable trade across regions of Africa and between countries. The Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, which we have introduced with Afreximbank and the African Union Commission, enables instantaneous digital payments on a platform in local currency. If you are a trader or an exporter in Ghana, you will now be able to export to Kenya using Ghanaian cedi, and your counterparty in Kenya will receive Kenyan shillings. So whilst the African continent may not yet have a common currency, I do believe that the introduction of the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System is a step in the direction of that common currency and shall enable, or shall be one of the critical enablers for boosting intra-Africa trade, particularly boosting intra-Africa trade, small medium enterprises, young entrepreneurs who want to access different parts of the African market, but were not able to do so because of the cost of currency. With the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, we are eliminating that challenge, and we want to ensure that not only do we address the cost of trade, but that also we address the very important imperative of inclusivity, so that the benefits of this market of 1.3 billion people are not just for large corporations. They should benefit, but that they are not just for large corporations, and that we see small medium enterprises benefiting from this agreement. There will, of course, be significant challenges as we implement the agreement. Some countries will experience balance of payments challenges. Some countries will experience institutional capacity, lack of institutional capacity. There may be instability in some parts of the continent. All of these challenges are to be expected as we implement this agreement. It is expected, however, that by the year 2035, and this expectation is a projection by the World Bank, that the AfCFTA has the potential to lift close to 100 million Africans out of moderate and abject poverty, and to contribute to Africa's GDP close to 9%, or 450 billion United States dollars, where, of course, we aggressively implement the objectives of the agreement, which is to eliminate intra-Africa barriers to investment and to trade. One of the enablers of competitiveness of African industrial development are the special economic zones that exist. African countries have invested over the last 20 to 30 years, have invested close to 60 million United States dollars in special economic zones, and we have seen the results that enable competitiveness and that have actually spurred on industrialization and have spurred on also the services sector, creating jobs and innovation. That is why the Assembly of Heads of States and Government decided that goods that are produced in special economic zones within the AfCFTA market, that these goods, provided they meet the rules of origin requirements or the local content requirements of the AfCFTA, that these goods will enjoy the preferential treatment of the AfCFTA market. And so if you look at, if you are considering special economic zones as an area of investment, now is the opportunity to do so, because the goods and the services that are produced in these special economic zones will now be part and will be integrated into the AfCFTA market. We know that there will be challenges also related to dispute settlement. That is why, for the very first time in the African continent, we have established a dispute settlement mechanism. The protocol on dispute settlement of the AfCFTA is currently being implemented and operationalized, and in fact, in February this year, the Assembly of Heads of States and Government appointed an appellate body as a final step in the operationalization of that protocol. The protocol is intended to ensure that not only trade commercial disputes are resolved in accordance with the rule of trade law, but also that we give investors confidence that where there is a dispute, that dispute will be adjudicated fairly, competently, and impartially. Let me conclude, if I may, with an observation. The world over the last 2 to 3 years has drastically changed, as we all know, as a result of the context between Russia and Ukraine, and of course as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The changed geopolitical context requires countries of the global south, and in particular African countries, to reconfigure how they shall engage with the rest of the world. The disruption of global supply chains in 2020 illustrates this point very, very starkly. The fact that vaccine manufacturing at that time benefited only 3 to 4% of Africans in April 2020, and other germ-killing products that were required to fight the pandemic. As a result of this disruption in global supply chains, and also, quite frankly, as a result of the fact that some countries decided to impose export restrictions so that Africans stood at the back of the queue to acquire vaccines. That reality must compel us to consider, how do we establish alternative supply chains in Africa? I've mentioned the auto sector, the pharmaceutical sector, there may be other sectors. But the idea that global supply chains must continue to exist and to be over-concentrated in 1 or 2 parts of the world is inconsistent with the objectives of the AFCFTA, and quite frankly, is inconsistent with the reality that all of us have experienced since February 2020. So the AFCFTA positions the African continent as a region that is an alternative region for the establishment of these very, very critical global supply chains. We're beginning to see potential for successful establishment of alternative value chains in Africa. I want to give you an example. In the area of digital trade and the digital economy, the African continent does have factor endowment advantages that I believe will place the African continent in good stead to be competitive in the area of data management, production of data, services, and management of data. Similarly, in the area of payments, as I've mentioned, and in the area of mobile phone-enabled banking, these are some of the areas where there is already innovation in Africa that is cutting edge, that places the African continent at a very, very unique position of advantage. And so, whilst the AFCFTA indeed is a trade agreement, it seeks to liberalize trade amongst these countries, significantly reduce and eliminate the barriers to trade. We also have to look at it as Africa's development tool to accelerate economic development, to create jobs, innovation, and to position the continent of Africa as globally competitive as any part of the world. And it shall happen. It shall happen because we know from the history of other parts of the world what happens when they integrate their market. The most successful integration model in the world, model of integration, of market integration, is the European Union. And we have seen how in the experience of the European Union, the newly acceded members of the EU, the GDP per capita numbers double, living standards are increased. We see, especially from the early 80s, we see how countries became part of a continental value chain that existed amongst a few, 10 or 12, and when they join that integration model, the positive results are there for us to see. But we also know that the success of the European Union did not start today, that it started 72 years ago with the establishment of the Coal and Steel Pact amongst 5 or 4 countries, 72 years ago. So the road to integration of a market is difficult and long, but the alternative, at least for the African continent, the alternative to market integration, to economic integration, is continued fragmentation, which we have seen since the end of colonialism. More importantly for you and for this discussion, it is an opportunity for investing in a seamless market and investing in a market which, as I mentioned earlier, by the year 2050, the youngest working force in the world will be on this continent. At that time, Africa, with a GDP of $16.2 trillion, is set to be the 8th or the 7th largest economy in the world. And so for investors who enter the market now, the first mover advantage will, of course, accrue. And that is why I welcome the opportunity to be with you today, and that is why I think this conversation is very, very timely, how India in particular, not just the BRICS, but India in particular, can benefit from the AFCFTA by increasing investments on the African continent. So I want to thank you all very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Bene is going to leave us now, but he's agreed to take 2 or 3 questions from the members of the audience before he departs. Please take this opportunity if you have a question to ask.
There are no questions. That's good.
Well, Pravir wants to ask.
His Excellency Secretary General, that was a wonderful exposition of the AFCFTA for the unlearned here. I'm sure Tim would have learnt a lot. Next time, you would know what AFCFTA is. So I have just a couple of questions, Your Excellency. Do we see a scenario in short-term or even medium-term future where, like Europe, the African continent would have a single currency? If yes, then is there any meetings, policies which has happened around that? And similar to that question, I listened very closely to when you expounded on the cost of currency conversion. And so if there is a single currency, I mean, it's a no-brainer, but I know how difficult it is to get more than 50 countries to agree on a single currency. And the second, Your Excellency, I would like to know that is there any possibility in short-term or medium-term future where a single, area like AFCFTA can have a free trade agreements with BRICS in general, in India in particular, in short to medium-term future? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the question. The AFCFTA is a very, very comprehensive trade agreement and very ambitious in terms of its objectives for reduction and elimination of intra-Africa trade and investment barriers. And as I mentioned earlier, it includes trade in services, trade in goods, competition policy, investment protection, digital trade, very comprehensive trade agreement. The one area that it does not include is monetary policy and fiscal policy, and in this case, it says nothing about achieving a common currency. And that is by deliberate design, because they are unrelated in the African Union. They are unrelated to the trade agreement decisions that say that one day Africa must have a single currency, a single investment bank, a single monetary bank, monetary policy institution. So a range of different institutions to which we are moving towards as a continent. But the reality is that we are moving very, very slowly in implementing those decisions. And that is because of the difficulty that is involved in convergence from a macroeconomic point of view. So if we're talking about a common currency, of course, as you know, the starting point is macroeconomic convergence. And if we look at the experience, the recent experience of the European Union, you can see, it illustrates very clearly that even after you've reached the convergence criteria, you may still want to withdraw. We saw this with Greece, with Portugal, Italy, and so on. So the big challenge towards moving to although the decision has been made, the decision is there, that Africa one day will have a monetary union, there are macroeconomic convergence challenges that have to be overcome. In the interim, as I said, we offer a solution through a digital payment system which will circumvent those macroeconomic challenges that we all know are there. So I do believe it will happen. I cannot give a time frame as to when it will happen. But in the interim, I would encourage our investors and encourage our small, medium enterprises to look at this digital technology for trade across the African continent. The objective, perhaps this is where I should have started to answer the question. The objective of integration in Africa was actually established as far back as May 1963 with the founding of the Organization of African Unity. And in the founding treaty, it says it very clearly that the African continent must be a monetary union, must overcome the fragmentation that exists, and so on. So there's a legal basis for having a common currency, and of course there's a political economy imperative for having a common currency. Regarding free trade agreements with others, at this stage the AfCFTA is a free trade area. It is not yet a customs union, and therefore the step before you become a customs union does not enable you to have a legally binding market access agreement with a third country. For the moment, until we become a customs union, bilateral trade agreements will be the primary instrument for engaging a third country. So in the case of India, if India is interested today in the market of Nigeria, for example, India would have to negotiate bilaterally with Nigeria as part of ECOWAS and so on. So that is the arrangement for now. However, and this is a very important factor, even if we are not in a trade agreement, let's say AfCFTA and India, there are steps that we can take that can create a commercially meaningful relationship between India and the AfCFTA. For example, we can decide that we will recognize one another's certificates of origin for goods that are traded between the 47 countries of the AfCFTA and India, and vice versa, so that we are enabling and enhancing the trade that must happen between India and African countries. So there are various steps that we can take which can lead to a commercially meaningful trade relationship, even though we may not have at law a free trade agreement. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Your Excellency. Much appreciated. All right, so we learned, so we heard.
Just a token of appreciation for His Excellency.
Okay. All right, before you take leave of us, I'm told that there's a token of appreciation that the forum would like to hand over to you. And for purposes of transparency, accountability, and free trade agreements, and all the things that go with it, if you can please come forward and let the story happen.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And now we are going to engage a little bit more with the earlier presentations. And it will not be for an extended time. It will be at most for 20 minutes or so. And I'm going to call on Mr. Damu Ravi to please come forward. Mr. Ravi, if you can please take your seat there. This is a Q&A session that we're going to have. Mr. Sibusiso Gamede, Legal and Policy SG Consultants. Mr. Gamede is Legal and Policy Practitioner on Trade and Investment Energy and has occupied different positions in the government: Executive Management Special Advisor of Agriculture and Land Reform to the Minister of Energy and worked for UN Basel Convention. He's lectured on trade and investment law, oil and gas law, and taxation of mineral products at the Kampala International University. He holds an LLB, Warwick University, and Masters of Law, Investment, Energy. He's joined us here. Let me just get the bio. Of Mr. Ashutosh Kumar. If you can please come forward. He's the CEO of State Bank of India, South Africa, and is a senior banking professional with 24 years of experience in India, Singapore, and South Africa. Mr. Ashutosh Kumar is a graduate in economics and holds professional qualification of Chartered Financial Analyst from CFA Institute, USA. Also certified associate of Institute of Bankers in India. Mr. Kumar also holds various other qualifications related to banking and finance, like certified treasury professionals, derivative certification in forex and equity, and so on. He's joined the SPI as probationary officer 2001, held various positions in different verticals of the bank, and previous important assignments held by Mr. Kumar include Deputy General Manager of the Jodhpur module, having overall responsibilities of 250 offices, Regional Manager of Aurangabad region, having responsibility over 110 offices, and Chief Dealer Derivatives as the SBI's Global Markets, Mumbai, and Manager at Performance Planning and Review Department at SBI's head office in Mumbai, Assistant Vice President, Trade Finance, Business Development, and Senior Marketing Executive for SBI in state of Goa. So you have your questions, do you? Okay, I hope you will ask your questions. As I've said, we are obviously chasing time, so we're going to be very strict with time. I want to start with you, Mr. Gamed. I'll ask one question whilst you're thinking your questions through. That, you know, we're talking about three different things here at the same time when we discuss how to harness the synergies between India and Africa cooperation, obviously premised on the Africa Free Trade or Continental Free Trade Agreement on one hand. Then somewhere we hear about BRICS. And of course, India itself or South Africa are independent entities in the whole story. So I would like to believe that there are several protocols or regulatory contexts that would govern the synergies or the harnessing of these synergies. If you can tell me how you think these pose a challenge and how they can be integrated, I'd like to hear from you.
Thank you, Joaquin. Good afternoon, everyone. I think one of the challenges with integration, whether it's market, one currency, or legal systems, is that you are trying to put together different systems. You are trying to put together diverse and fragmented systems. Now, if you look at trade and investment, I'll talk specifically of investments. It's easy to integrate those under bilateral investment treaty because that's between two countries. They can agree on the terms, they can agree on the regulatory framework, and they can agree on the dispute settlement mechanism. With the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, again, it's not a big challenge because we are using a legal framework which has to be agreed between all the parties. They can agree on certain issues also. But then the challenge with something like that is the interaction between that regional framework and the domestic law. Because some of the issues will have to be regulated in accordance with the national laws. Now, if you take BRICS, BRICS is an agreed conglomeration of different countries. But there is no legal framework that currently governs investments. Now, how are you going to deal with the issues of investment protocols? For instance, which law will be applicable in the trade and investments? Investment protection. Now, those that are working on trade and investment will know that there's currently a big debate about protection of investors and the principle of sustainable development. Host countries or host governments are saying we're not going to provide investors with protections that undermine our right to sovereignty, our right to regulate for sustainable development. Now, if you don't have a legal instrument that governs your relations, how are you going to achieve that? And the third thing is investment dispute settlement. Now, that's a big challenge now in the multilateral arrangements. In the bilateral, it's easy. You can agree. Either we go for investment arbitration, we go for state-to-state arbitration, or we use international courts, or we use domestic courts. But now, there's a dispute. Countries are not agreeing on what is the best method of resolving the disputes. On one hand, you have the developing countries, those countries that are those that are importing in capital, who are saying, no, the investment arbitration is not working for us because it seems to favor investors. And it also challenges our rights to regulate the states. The capital importing countries are saying, no, we want arbitration. Now, if I can talk about the challenges and the deficiencies of the current investment dispute settlement system, it will take us another 3 days. That's something that I'm doing my PhD on. And the biggest question also is what I've mentioned, and His Excellency, the Secretary, alluded to it. The interplay between these instruments and national laws. Because everything else has to be governed according to the constitution of those countries. So those are the challenges. Now, we have, whether in the academia or as policymakers, to resolve those issues before we can enhance the synergies. Because without resolving those issues, we'll be like the EU. If you look at how the EU, when did their discussions start to integrate, and when did it happen, and what are the current challenges? The journey has not been completed. Now, there was also a question that was posed to the Secretary, which I thought will also assist in terms of how do we ensure that there is a benefit, especially with the Africa continental free trade area. For outside parties that are not party to it, the investment protocol that has been adopted, which is still being developed, as the Secretary said, and operationalized, only provides for the nationals of the parties that are members of the trade area, and it only provides for juridical entities, legal entities, which are established within the area of the member. Which means companies from India, companies from Brazil cannot benefit from that. Now, he alluded that you can have an agreement on the certificate of origin and all that. In terms of the Africa continental free trade, you can still benefit, but what you need to do are two things. As he alluded also, is that you need to establish bilateral investment treaties. Now, the challenge with that is that the world is moving away from bilateral investment treaties to new investment agreements. That's a dilemma again. Or you can form an entity in the member states. For instance, if you are in manufacturing, you can register an entity in the member state. The challenge also with that is that there are national laws that you have to comply with. For instance, some other countries say, no, you can't invest in certain industries, or if you want to invest in our country, you need to have a partnership with a local individual or company, or you must buy all your raw materials in the country. So those are the issues that we need to think about and we need to address, Pratim, to be able to maximize the benefits of the three regimes that we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ravi, would you like to add to that, or Mr. Kumar, would you like to make comments?
Well, let me be very brief on this. I just want to add to what our friend has just mentioned. I think I'll not touch into the problem areas, but I feel let's look at the other side of it. Trade, investment, services, these are so interlinked concepts, and we have to recognize this fact. As and when countries liberalize and create an enabling environment for trade, and I think AFC, FTA is I believe is precisely going to work in the direction of liberalizing the economies and creating openness and transparency for greater trade, intra-African trade. Now that itself is a mood setting for investments. Why will any country come and invest just like that? They'll have to see their return on investment. They have to see that it makes immense sense for them to make a product, invest in that country, make a product, or take it out, or sell it in the country. But if the Africa-wide continental free trade agreement comes into force, yes, a lot of companies will be motivated to come into Africa to invest, and then what will drive that? And the enabling provisions there, again, investment treaties, as our friend has just mentioned about it. Of course, the litigation, the arbitration, the investor-state dispute settlement issues is another entirely gamut, different area of work, which it will take another session for us to talk. But I think it will provide incentives for companies to come and invest. Then comes the payment issue, the national currencies. Well, this will automatically generate its own momentum. How companies will seek solutions in terms of payments, do national currencies or payment gateways, fintech solutions. These will all come into force. So where does BRICS come in the whole metrics? In my view, the BRICS already has a strategy for economic and investment 2025 roadmap. Under that framework, there are several frameworks have already been worked out. For example, in the e-commerce space, there is also services space, several frameworks. Now, these developments within the BRICS space will come in at a time when they think that companies in BRICS countries will feel, yes, a particular country in Africa is supporting that kind of economic activity, that kind of investment. But I think going forward, the BRICS is a good trendsetter. It will encourage companies in the BRICS countries to come to Africa and look at this potential. Because, as I said, 21st century will have a great role for Africa, and many countries will want to partner with African countries, and that's how they see the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi, and good afternoon, everyone. I will build upon further on what Sir has said, and in his earlier speech also he was stressing on win-win situation for everyone. So without win-win it is not going to work. Like African continental free trade area, this is result of the emerging ambition within the continent to become more self-reliant. And I will showcase that how it will not only achieve whatever the set targets are, but it will surpass also if we move with the right intent and in the right direction. I am from State Bank of India. We are the only bank present here from India in South Africa. So I will give you some examples from the ground which will support that how it is going to click in a big way going forward. As Sir was mentioning before also in his speech, that we have to be innovative, we have to be bringing out the wage of financing, the wage of supporting, which will not only grow, it will grow all parties concerned and all countries concerned. So I will briefly touch upon few examples. One of the examples is related to project guarantees. So many of the Indian corporates, they have good interest in Africa for businesses. They want to execute the projects. That is across Africa, not only in South Africa. For executing those projects, they need bank guarantees or project guarantees across Africa. Now, we, State Bank of India here, become a gateway to all these corporates to enter into the Africa. So, we have arrangements with almost 44 countries out of 55 countries in Africa, wherein we can get the project guarantees executed through them. And in recent past, we have done with 22 countries already. So that shows that without even, this AFCFTA being in place, with arrangements existing, we can reach out and support the Indian corporates to get their projects going in these countries. So once AFCFTA is in place, it is going to be it will increase the businesses in many folds. Next example, and these projects are relating to various types. I mean, it's one project in which we were related, that was electrification in Mali, then rural electrification in Burkina Faso, then some road projects in one of the countries, Ghana. So like that, in IT sector also many projects we have been part of. So once AFCFTA is there, it is going to increase many folds. Another area which I would like to highlight and showcase, that that is syndicated loan model. So that is a very common mode of finance across the globe, wherein large corporates are funded through a syndicated loan facility, wherein huge loans are given to these corporates by a group of banks. So in a new initiative, you can say, from us, we were the one of the first banks from India to do that we entered into the origination and distribution model of syndicated finance. In that, how it happens that we not only commit our part for the syndicated deals, but we commit to get new investor also for the deal. So that way we have been part of syndicated deals in recent past to the tune of almost $3 billion, and in that we have been in a position to get few banks from outside Africa also to bring and become part of the investor group here. So we got 2 banks from Dubai, one from London, one from Sydney. So, but once things are even better with AFCFTA in place, I am seeing it to increase many more times. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And now we're going to hear from the, is that for later now, or just Q&A session?
After the Q&A.
Oh, okay. That's right. Okay, ma'am, let me get the mic to you. I would like to take 2 questions and then we wrap it.
I need to have great
Okay. All right. Thanks, ma'am.
Thank you. Good day. My name is... Okay, My name is Ms. Sela Kopentlapo. I'm the CEO of the African Rail Industry Association. On the legal side, and particularly looking at funding so that we don't have stranglehold relationships when it comes to funding, can we use our private law to ensure and build on the investment that we're looking at? For an example, South Africa has recently ratified the Luxembourg Rail Protocol to the Cape Town Convention. Can we look at such instruments to open up funding, particularly from private sector, where there will be agreements between a private company and a private funder? And one of the most important lines, I normally say that logistics are the backbone of any economy. And it's supported by the African Union goals, where it wants to see the world-class infrastructure crisscrossing the continent. But also we're now talking about, we've got the youngest youth. We need to have job retention and job creation. So from the South African point of view, I've got a company here that has invested a lot of money in India, but the program is taking 3 years. Now, as business, we want to move efficiently. So I would like to have anybody from India to take on that, because it's an investment in your country. There will be manufacturing in your country. There will also be that job creation. But having the same breath, the win-win situation, right? So I'm looking for locomotives, diesel or electric, for South African market from India. So we don't just talk, we mean business, and we want to work. And in closing, taking from the African Union that let us make Africa the tree of life. We are a tree of life, and we're the last frontier, and we're looking for investors, but investors that understand exactly what win and win situation is. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I saw a hand somewhere, and yeah, I think this will be the last question, comment.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Tim. I think my question is actually in relation to what the lady actually asked before. I come from a mining business, myself, Manish Kumar, and one of the things of the untapped Africa is the logistics and the electrification, which panelist Mr. Ashutosh Kumar actually mentioned about. And I think unless we are able to join Africa in terms of the infrastructure from one coast to the other coast, from the east to the west, from the north to the south, and tapping, say, hydroelectric or renewables from parts of Congo to Africa, it would be very challenging to actually grow any business opportunity in terms of even given that what AFCFTA is trying to actually achieve. So yeah, I will really appreciate some comments and thoughts on what are the plans and how do you think that AFCFTA can learn from BRICS, where both China and India have managed to actually conquer this in their each aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ravi, I think you should take this, or Mr. Gamede, who likes to go first? The microphone is still there. Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer the legal, the private to private. Any investment or trade takes place under a specific framework. It could be a bilateral, it could be a multilateral. Now, under bilateral, you will have two components. A private investor investing in a private business in the host state, or a private investor investing in a public project. So you are, and you can approach private investors anyway, but they will always refer to that particular framework agreement which governs your relationship or the relationship between the two countries. It's also the same with the public to public, where it's government entity or government investing in government infrastructure project. There'll always be a framework that takes place under.
Thank you very much. I think that these two further questions are very interesting questions. Let me come to that from the point of view of how other countries have handled that. If you look at it around the world, those countries which have first tackled their infrastructure bottlenecks and created a robust infrastructure, roads, railway networks, energy, they have really accelerated in the growth. I think this is a very well known fact. If you look at the European Union, across the European Union you have excellent road networks, excellent railway network, and the energy. So look at it in ASEAN, it's another great classic example. Individually, countries which have achieved that scale of growth, including India and China, also indicate the same kind of strategy in the way the growth has been achieved. So growth will accelerate if you have good infrastructure. And in the case of Africa, even if you would have the AFCFTA, you would still need the fundamentals clear, which is actually the infrastructure creation. The infrastructure creation, like the lady has mentioned about, how do you have crisscrossing Africa, railway networks and roadways? Absolutely right, and that's a very important condition for growth to happen. But in my view, the way to go about it is, first you need to create infrastructure investment climate in each of the countries. Because companies won't come to invest unless and until you have created that enabling environment that's attractive enough for companies to come and invest in those areas. Now let's look at what the Indian companies are saying. We have in the railway network, before I came here, I was talking with the public sector enterprises, which is the RITES India, the IRCON India, and the RVNL. Now these are giant companies in the railway network. We have today created, I think, second largest railway network in the world after China. And they're still wanting to go out of India. They've been so far only been doing the domestic arena, but now they want to go out. And Africa is definitely a good bet for them. They want to come to Africa and work in these mega projects of creating railway networks. and bring locomotives. Now, we have done something very interesting in the last few years, which is we are accelerating the pace of our railway network, the locomotives, and we have also electrified. The electrification of our network is now complete, 100%. But we have done it with a clear objective and the determination of the Prime Minister's vision. In the same way, I believe there is potential for India to come to Africa, collaborate with African countries, and be able to do these projects. So we need enabling environment, investment in them. I'll come to the next point, which is actually how you tap the mining. The mines are resource-rich countries, continent is Africa, which many countries will need. And I see this as a win-win situation, because as India grows, we will also need rare earth minerals, which Africa is again having huge potential in that space. And even minerals like iron ore, copper, manganese, nickel, all these things are very, very important for any country that is also growing. Now, as I said in my first intervention, I said that, we have to look at taking the commodities back after doing value addition, at least at one phase. That is make a win-win situation. I'll come to that. Unless until you have a good road network, railway network, how will you lift these commodities? It's not that easy. You've got to have a plan and a strategy for that. The last item I had in mind was actually the energy space. Unless, again, energy markets are liberalized, you enable companies to trade energy cross-border within Africa, it will not be that attractive for companies to come and put gigawatt scale energy projects in the country. Either it is renewable space or in the hydro space. I think this is where we need to understand that liberalizing the energy market is a very, very important primary step to the direction of it. So you have a lot of coal reserves, but unfortunately around the world, the multinational banks will not invest in that area because of the fossil fuels and the climate change challenges that are there. But I think India and Africa, countries like us, we can work together to be able to invest and reap this, the potential in the energy space. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will just add upon what sir has said. Very rightly said that value adding on the exports or trade happening from Africa is not there. So most of the things you will see that raw things or raw materials only are going out. And if I see the infrastructure part, infrastructure within Africa really not satisfactory. Even the road network is not that good. Railways, it's difficult to say it doesn't exist a good railway infrastructure within Africa. And even air connectivity, if you see, sometimes to go from one country's capital in Africa to another country's capital in Africa, you might have to route through maybe UK or Dubai. So that's true that the infrastructure part is really lacking. But the major reason for that is because within Africa, the trade volume also is very low. If we see various different trade areas, say if I consider Asia also as a trade area, or Europe as a trade area, and Africa as a trade area. So within Europe, the kind of trade happens, compared to that within Africa, the kind of trade happens is very, very low. So because that is low, so then it becomes a problem of what will come first, the hen or the egg. But here it is not that complicated. Here the infrastructure must come first. Once infrastructure is in place, definitely we will see the trade to go up. AFCFTA is a very right step in the right direction, because once you have the duties which are removed, once you have non-tariff barriers which are gone, then that will also boost the trade to go up, and then building infrastructure along with that will definitely take it further up. Thank you. Those are 2 cents from my side.
Thanks very much to the panelists for your responses and for availing yourselves. Mr. Ravi, Mr. Kumar, Mr. Gamede, much appreciated. And now, do we hand over something to them, or?
Can you please take one more question?
I wish we did, but we are seriously overrunning time-wise, so I need to be advised here. Okay, we can hear you from there then. That would help, maybe keep it shorter for that matter.
Sure, thank you so much. My name is Yash, I'm from Sandton. Thank you for it. So my question was to Mr. Ashutosh Kumar. So Mr. Ravi mentioned that there's a lack of trust between Indian banks and South African banks. So I want to know your thoughts on it and why that trust is not built. You know, we always say that Indian economy is growing and this Indian banking system is so good and it's so inspiring. So why that thing was being mentioned?
Sure. Thank you. Issue of trust between Indian and South African banks.
I'm not sure whether it has transmitted correctly. I don't think he has meant that, there is no trust or there is, lack of trust between, because a lot of business is happening between India and Africa, between Indian banks and African banks. And there are arrangements in place, like we have correspondent banking relations, wherein through authenticated messages and through authenticated gateways, we are doing a lot of business. So there is a need to wrap it up further. I don't see that there is a lack of trust once you have established relations with that particular bank.
Thank you.
What is said.
Okay.
It's very important. I feel there's a misperception which I need to correct. So, see, when I mentioned that, the banks still don't recognize each other, that doesn't mean that, they are, there's a mix-up. Actually, it's a lack of information between the banking structures that they're not able to recognize LCs. So, it's a huge continent, and there are banks in all over this continent. So, our traders from India are not able to do aggressively trading because the LCs are all not recognized. I think both sides, our banks or the banks here. So that's where we need to bring in the trade financing element to be able to tackle that. But let me leave with a very lost thought. The money for good projects is not in short supply. It's a huge resource available even within the Indian banking system and also international banking system and international financial institutions. As I said, even Indian banks, it's only that they need to see a good project, that you will be able to invest huge amounts, billions of dollars, and we'll also do as a syndicate measure, you can do combination of banks taking up this big project. But I think it's important for both the industry to push that idea that, you are willing to take that little bit of risk and the banks and the government will support that. And I also like to thank the diaspora. I think that we haven't touched on the important role of diaspora. They are the real prime movers of businesses today. And India that way is very fortunate. We have a very strong diaspora in Africa, about over 3 million people who are very successful. They've done very well. They've taken huge risks to come here to do. And at the same time, we are grateful for the governments and the countries having given them the home and enabling them to really grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we are now going to hand over the gifts to the panelists. Thank you. In the meantime, I'm going to call on the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, the Ambassador of Eritrea, His Excellency Saleh Omar Abdu, to please come forward and make a couple of remarks.
Thank you. It's finished, but there's the mic. I'll be very and hand over. Okay.
Good afternoon. Let me first apologize for coming late. It is only due to the prearranged engagements that I was. Having said that, let me first thank the program director, the South African Indian Business Forum President, Indian community, business community in South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Kumar, High Commissioner of India to South Africa, ambassadors and high commissioners, fellow ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. I am honored to be here today to be part of the Indian Business Forum in South Africa, because this is a momentous occasion for both countries to evaluate the part-business relationship and reinvigorate new venues of trade and investment for the future. India and South Africa are two of the fastest growing economies in the world, and they have a lot to offer each other and to the continent as a whole. As we know, the historical ties between India and South Africa date back to the days of the Indian indentured labor system. The growing importance of India descent in South Africa is essential to the national economy. The opportunities for Indian business in South Africa include the ever-increasing middle class and the demand for ICT infrastructure. India is a major player in the global IT and pharmaceutical sectors, and South Africa is a leading exporter of commodities and minerals, and both major markets for common goals. The potential for trade and the investment between these countries is enormous. This forum aims to bring together business leaders from India and South Africa to discuss ways to boost trade and investment between these two countries. Africa in general is looking at ways to promote cooperation in areas such as innovation, technology, and skills development. Ladies and gentlemen, the African continent free trade area aims to boost intra-Africa trade by eliminating tariffs on most goods traded between member states. However, African continental free trade area is at an early stage, and like other African mega projects, it applies a top-bottom approach. As a result, the effect will not be seen in the short and medium terms. Nevertheless, India is one of the largest trading partners of Africa, and I believe that African continental free trade area presents an opportunity for both countries to boost their trade and economic cooperation further. By harnessing a synergy in trade cooperation, India and Africa can reap the full benefits and build a more robust economic partnership for the future. India and Africa can work together to develop regional value chains in areas such as textiles, garments, pharmaceuticals, and pharmaceuticals. This will help to create jobs and boost economic growth in many ways. There is no reasonable doubt that India can invest in Africa's infrastructure, such as roads, ports, and power plants. Such an approach will help it to improve connectivity and attract investment in Africa. Africa can also invest in India's technology sector, such as the IT and software industry. I believe such an initiative will help to create jobs and boost innovation in both countries. ladies and gentlemen, India and Africa can cooperate on research and development in areas such as agriculture, healthcare, and renewable energy. This will help countries develop new technologies and solutions to their common challenges. For example, India and South Africa are already cooperating on research into solar energy. There are just a few these are just a few examples of how India and Africa can harness synergy in trade cooperation. By working together, India and Africa can create a more prosperous and equitable future for both countries. I am confident that this forum was a success, and I look forward to working with you all to build a more robust economic relationship between India and South Africa, as well as with the rest of the African countries. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks. And now, as we draw to a close, I'm going to call on Mr. Yudis Hussain, the Acting Head, Investment South Africa, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, to summarize the proceedings of today and give us the South African government's perspective on the initiatives of this nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director, Mr. Tim Modise. Good afternoon and namaste. I'd like to say all protocols are observed as we are now at the tail end of the day, and I don't want to keep you waiting. Thank you very much, the High Commission of India and CII for asking me to make a few remarks and to summarize this event of today. And thank you very much. I think a lot has been covered today in a very rich and robust discussion between what we came out here today. Firstly, let me say this at the outset: a warm welcome to all the Indian delegation to this BRICS summit. I'm sure you'll find after post-COVID, South Africa is indeed a beautiful country, and you spend your time doing business, but also you get the time to have some fun in South Africa. Getting back to what we had today, this discussion, I think to start off, the relationship between South Africa and India is very deep. It's an historical, political relationship, but it's also an economic relationship. And India has an economic relationship not only in South Africa, but also in the African continent. At the outset, you heard that there are more than 100,000 people employed on the African continent, about 25,000 of those in South Africa. So both our countries are indeed trading nations. We understand trade. India has been trading on the African continent as well as a significant trading partner to South Africa and an investment partner to South Africa. So pardon me, I do not like to prepare remarks. I like to do things off the cuff, because when you sit amongst dear brothers and sisters, you can talk quite openly. When I came in, I saw a card. It's on your table. It says, on the back of the card, it says, "Leave no child behind for education." So in the themes that have been running for the day, the themes basically is both on prosperity and growth. So in order to have growth and prosperity in this new round of economy, I would say that in order for growth and prosperity, we need to leave no citizen of the soil behind in economic development. And that's the kind of discussion we need to have. When you look at the growth parallels, India is fast growing, and we like to emulate your growth. The continent itself, as has been explained, it's sheer dynamic. The continent, by 2025, 1 in 5 people will be African. The African continent is the second largest continent after Asia. What you see is more than 52 urban cities with more than 1 million people. You have more than 650 million people that will be in the middle class by 2030. But also, what I would like is that the discussion at the tail end came, and what I'd like to focus on. In the tail end, we spoke about infrastructure and logistics. And I'll come back to this because I want to talk about energy and water. So, during the discussions, we had key themes. We had key sectors of education. We spoke about skills and innovation, and I like what the person at the outset said, the skills need to be localized. We had sectors in pharmaceuticals. If you say India is the pharmacy of the world, quite rightly so, then you know a pharmacy can have homes, it can be franchised. Right? So there should be pharmaceutical hubs on the African continent supported by India. If you look at the 2063 agenda of the African Union, you see pharmaceuticals needs to be localized by 60%. Somebody said today we need to do fill and finish. On this continent, there is no API production capacity. So what needs to happen is the value chain of API, fill and finish on the African continent. And we did that, part of it, in how we were able to mobilize during the COVID pandemic. And thank you to India for supporting us when there was a critical shortage of supply of certain APIs. So, pharmaceuticals, the sectors of food security, agro-processing, other sectors of ICT, and then infrastructure, and then towards the end, we also had a discussion about funding, and logistics and infrastructure. So, when you look at the growth of the African continent, I think growth can only happen if we have energy security. If you cut everything that you spoke about today, the one thing that we can work on is on energy. When you look at what we are asked to do and what we need to do and what we want to do on energy, the transition for us on the continent has to be indeed a just transition. It has to be an equitable transition. It has to be a transition that is inclusive, and the fundamental thing is that in order to have the growth that we aspire for an African continent for all, it must not lead to energy poverty. So that is what we try to seek in Africa. And I think that the energy is a significant area of cooperation and development with India itself. So energy as a whole, the entire energy value chain, because Africa, when I mentioned these numbers, by 2025 will have a population of 1.5 billion. Half of that population doesn't have electricity. So universal access for energy is the most significant business opportunity that we can have. And to add to that, I would add water. Water technology and water Africa has 60% of arable land. But these two ingredients are the most significant ingredients for us to become a global producer in terms of food, agro-processing and food processing. This continent has it. So that you have a lot of technology in India, even in efficiencies and agricultural implements and so forth. So what we spoke about, automotives, the Secretary General mentioned automotives. South Africa is transitioning from ICE to NEVs. That brings about a significant opportunity for batteries and for e-mobility and for charging stations. And this is where we want to have a discussion with Indian companies. So in order for us to have that growth, and I said at the outset, the two broad themes was on growth and as well as on prosperity. But that prosperity needs to be mutual. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be equitable. It needs to be inclusive. And as I said, it must lead to energy inclusivity. So in order for us to advance and achieve this economic development in a much more transparent and a much more equal growth across the continent, so that societies can be uplifted and societies can be taken away from the poverty barrier. So, and then we also spoke about the collaboration about SEZs. South Africa has a number of SEZs, which offer companies a wonderful opportunity to work in South Africa as a hub into the African continent. Now what will happen and what is happening, you would know that today the disruptions in global supply chains. Global supply chains today are becoming shorter. So what needs to happen? Global supply chains firstly need to be from global to regional and from regional to local. And what the Secretary General mentioned, located in special economic zones. So we have that in South Africa. We have special economic zones for manufacturing, for green, for even, we have now designated one in the Northern Cape for metallurgical industries. I also would like to make a comment of what came out in terms of the bilateral investment treaties. Now, South Africa is one of those countries that has taken the decision to modernize our framework, our investment framework. So what we do have, we no longer sign bilateral investment treaties because we've modernized our framework. We have an Investment Act. The Investment Act is called Investment Protection and Reciprocal Protection of Investment. And this act provides the legal certainty for companies to operate for both domestic and foreign businesses. Because in South Africa, we have a very sound legal system. We have a very robust judiciary in South Africa. It's proven time and again. So in South Africa, we have a very strong legal system. We have very strong investment protection. We rank in the top 10 in the world. So I think in the future, as we're going, there are a number of bilateral engagements, but within the context of the African Union, there will be an investment protection agreement also. So I think from our side, from India, South Africa, and the African continent, given the dip that we had in the COVID period, we need to set ourselves new, ambitious targets. I do know, and I have been told that when you are here, India is also now consuming our beautiful apples and pears and peaches, right? We are waiting for you to give us so trade barriers is one thing. When trade finance, we spoke about trade barriers. South Africa as a country, a small population of 60 million people, but has the finest market access regime in the world, I think so. An average weighted tariff of under 10%. So we're waiting for you to give us the protocol access for our beautiful avocados. And like that, there are many there are many products that we can talk about India and South Africa and Africa. So when I spoke about energy, we talked about the value chain of energy. But this continent has more than 60% of the critical mineral resources. South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, DRC has the minerals for the new energy rollout. But therein lies what you spoke about, the value addition that we could do. So partnership, if we talk about the global south, a partnership on developing the critical mineral value chain, that is what we try to seek, so that we are in the value chain process, in value addition. So we would love to have these kind of discussions, so that our trade profile, we need to set up two things: an ambitious target for trade and an ambitious target for investment in South Africa and the African continent. We have a team. I come from a unit in the DTIC called Investment SA, and we love to talk to all investors. We know the good work that companies like Vendata are doing in the Northern Cape, and we'd love to advise you and attract this kind of investment in a number of special economic zones and other areas of our country. But to conclude, Program Director, I think the two words were growth and prosperity. But the growth and prosperity needs to leave us as a continent on an equal level out of poverty. That is what I think economic development needs to be, leads to equality for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yunus Hussain, the Acting Head of Investment, South Africa Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, for your remarks. As we now conclude today's proceedings, Mr. Praveen Tripathi, please come forward to make your vote of thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much. So my first vote of thanks is to you. But, when Mr. Yunus Hussain was talking about the fruits, as a perennial food and perennial fruit eater, I was almost salivating with the prospect of getting Indian mangoes here. Having said that, my first and foremost thanks is to the sponsors of this event. We are very proud that we had a platinum sponsor, NG Global, and then we had a gold sponsor, Tech Mahindra, and two silver sponsors, Jindal SA and Velocity Venture. We are also deeply indebted to the High Commission of India and the Consulate General of India for the support in making this event happen. So this event actually evolved from a very small AGM of close to our members to suddenly such a huge event. And thanks to the Secretary ER, Mr. Damu Ravi, if it wasn't for your visit, we would still have been content with our AGM. Thank you so much, sir. I thank the members of the Diplomatic Corps who were here. My special thanks to the Ambassador of Eritrea and Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, who came in late but delivered a very powerful speech. A special thanks to the delegates and officials from the DTIC. Special thanks to Mr. Yunus Hussain for summarizing everything. A very, very special thanks to Tim Modise, who took time out and came out from cold to have such a hot seat here. Thank you so much, sir. Thank the Maslow Hotel for their support. Zubi and team for the sound, cameras, action. Concept Digicom, Srishti Somani for digital marketing. Our administrators, Kiran Dulera and Anita Turkey, for their unflappable running around from here to there. I thank the CNBC Africa team for being here most of the time. And I thank my wife for putting up with me for the last 2 days. It was stressful. Thank you so much. Thank you. And finally, the audience, you were magnificent. Despite, being made to sit at this graveyard shift, you still continue to sit here. And I've got something, special now. There is going to be a live band, and there are, wines in the ice packs here. So now you can party if you want to. But if you want to go home, you're most welcome to go home. But the party is on, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But before we leave, sir, I would just like to call Mr. Yunus Hussain and Mr. Mahesh, the High Commissioner and Ambassador of Eritrea. We've got a small token of appreciation for all of you, sir. Mr. Yunus? And Ms. Homera, please, if you can.
You do all that, I'll keep on doing.
Yellow goods. Okay. So you are in infrastructure, civil construction.
चलिए जनरल के पास प्लीज चलिए हाँ दोनों चलेंगे पर्स मत लीजिए खाली जाते हैं पर्स तो ले लूँगी चलिए बोलिए क्या है बच्चों को जानते हैं ना मधु जी बोल रहे पीछे बैठो आपने देखा वो जो इंडिया का वैसे भी करके उसे लेके आएंगे छोड़ के लेके नहीं साउथ अफ्रीका में ना उसका थोड़ा ज़्यादा रिस्पेक्ट है यहाँ वैल्यू इंडिया में नहीं है इंडिया में भी ओके बाय I was expecting